I suppose, like everyone else, I get asked a lot of questions about my work, what it entails, and what I do. And when we're talking about mediation and conflict resolution, one of the more common questions is, are there any common factors that get us into the room or things you discover as you're working with people? And if there is one predominant factor, it is that people simply feel that they haven't been listened to. Certainly in our coaching work too, in our personal development work, team development work, you'll come across individuals who similarly feel that they haven't been listened to. And this creates all sorts of senses of isolation, a dent in their self-worth, a feeling that their opinion has no value to their manager, their team leader, or their organisation. And it really does create a distance between the person and their employer, their manager. And if we extend it into personal relationships, so relationships outside of work, a real gap between the person who's talking and the person who's supposedly listening. So what we have here is a presentation that gives you some idea about different levels of listening and some techniques that you might want to deploy or remind yourself of so that we do have better conversations. I hope you enjoyed. Thank you very much for looking in. Well, conversations work at two levels, don't they? They work at transmit and receive. And the nice thing is that when we're transmitting, it's nice to believe that we're being received. And when we're receiving, it's also pretty good because we can actually feel that we're engaged in the conversation. Well, cosmetic listening, help me out with this. What I'd like you to do is to see if you can reflect on a time, on an occasion, when you were in a conversation with someone and it was obviously clear that they weren't listening. Can you do that now? Okay, what I'd now like you to do is to see if you can just capture a few of the feelings that you had about that, how you felt toward the person who was supposed to be listening to you. I'm going to bet that it's not great, is it? So one of the first things we need to get over with listening is the idea that we're just there to be spoken at. It's not. It's actually part of a two-way process with the capacity to build something quite interesting and quite powerful. As conversations develop, it becomes pretty obvious that we're being heard, we're being listened to, and that our ideas are being picked up on and responded to. And that's the good stuff. That's a conversational listening. And it's that actually gives us the confidence and just to carry on with the conversation. Look, this is okay for me. I'm being heard. And there are things that we need to do to show people that that's what's happening. And we'll discuss some of those ideas a little later in the presentation. This is, I think, about giving a very overt demonstration that you're listening to somebody, that you may be checking back on what they've said, and that's being done in a way that encourages contributions and developments and flow, that it's not interrupting, and that our non-verbal behaviour, the way we sit, our posture, shows that we're engaged, and also our paraverbal behaviour. Now, by paraverbals, I mean those noises that we make that sound a little bit like this. Yeah, okay. And those sounds, although they have very little semantic value, what they're actually doing is sending out a signal to the person that I'm in here with you and I am listening to you. And they are very, very important, together with that, looking that we are engaged. Now, there is a quite serious message that comes out of this that we need to consider as listeners. What state are we in at the time? Because if we've got deadlines, if we're fatigued, if we're thinking about the next thing to do, we're not going to be in as good a state to listen as we should be. So a little bit of self-awareness and taking account of how we feel is a really important component of the process. I think we all know and understand that some conversations, whether in our personal lives or our professional lives, just aren't easy. And we may have reached a pivotal point where that conversation has to be had. If you're on the receiving end, if you're listening to that conversation, the process, no matter how charged it may be, how emotional it may be, can be helped if the person who is speaking is convinced that you are listening to them. So we're moving here from active listening to a shift in focus from you, the listener, to entirely the person who is talking to you. And the quote from Stephen Covey that most people listen with the intent to reply rather than the intent to understand is actually quite pertinent. It's really hard to stop thinking about what we're going to say next. If you're at all interested in developing your skills or finding out more about conflict resolution, about developing positive conversations, I can thoroughly recommend the book, Stephen R. Covey, The Third Alternative. Generally speaking, we've met the person who we're going to be in a dialogue with, and we will have formed some opinions about that person, some of them good, some of them bad, some of them mixed. In order to develop the conversation and to allow it some room to expand and grow, it's going to be necessary for us to suspend some of those opinions and beliefs and see if we can enter that reasonably neutral place. Now, difficult conversations are tough enough, and I'd like you again to work with me here. Have you ever been in a situation where somebody said to you, look, the next 20 minutes, half hour, they're all yours, and you're getting into it and you're really beginning to get some ideas across, and the phone goes, or they receive a text message, or there's a knock on the door and somebody says, can I just have a few seconds? And you know that it's a complete blocker and stopper. Also really important is just create that time and space to let people develop their train of thought on what are sometimes very difficult issues in which to have a conversation about. Sometimes there are a number of ideas occurring at once. I'm certain that you've been in that situation, and when we're verbalising it, it can sound quite confused and confusing, but what we're actually trying to do is to pull it together in a way that makes some sort of sense, and we have to allow time and space for people to do that. Okay, so we are ready to go. We are set up. We've got a good idea about how we can stay engaged in conversation, how to look engaged, how to maybe frame some questions that encourage the person who's talking to tell us more and to develop their ideas. We've got all that in place. And then something is said that springs off an emotional reaction in us. It could be one of anger, sadness. It could be something that we find funny that's not intended to be funny. And I think it's something that we need to prepare ourselves for, that we don't stick a label on someone because they've made us angry. We don't stick a label on someone because they've made us sad. What they're doing is entering a dialogue with us where they're giving us some information. And tough though it is, we have to, if you like, turn down our emotional response to that information and see if we can use it in a far more productive way to develop our understanding of the person and where it is they're coming from and what it is they really want to tell us. I have yet to meet anybody who enjoys being stared at, and there is a huge difference between positive eye contact and the kind of eye contact that makes us feel, well, let's cut to the chase, just a little bit creepy. What we have to do here is to convince a person who's talking to us through our non-verbal behaviour that we are listening to them, we're with them, we're in touch with them, and we can do that by accessing eye contact very briefly, but equally as effective is just mapping around the face so that we're, maybe just above the eyes, just around the chin, and staying in touch, in contact, but not in an overwhelming way. And we all know what it is, and we can all feel that slight difference in how we're feeling about it when it hangs on just too long. So we've got our good verbal attention, where we're showing some really positive signs that we're listening, we're in the room with the person, we are showing that we're engaged with them, we're leaning towards them, we're giving clarifying nods and paraverbals. What we need to be very receptive to are changes in the person's body language. It gives us an opportunity sometimes to say, when you talked about so-and-so, you looked quite uncomfortable there. There was a real shift, and I wonder if you'd like to tell me a bit more about that. And similarly, we can say to someone, when you spoke about X, Y, or Z, you really picked up there. You came alive. It would really help me if you could tell me a bit more about that. Maybe I could suggest, that's something we could do together. So we're actually entering into a much more valuable, productive and meaningful dialogue with someone. that's based on our capacity to listen, our capacity to shut up, and also our capacity to pick up on some of the non-verbal shifts in the person with whom we're in a conversation, and to use those as a basis for inquiry or for questions that enable them to say more than they might otherwise have done. Okay, so it's anecdote time. We were once conducting a very sensitive mediation, and we'd finally got, we thought, the two disputants to enter some kind of a dialogue. Little did we know that the room we were using actually joined two other rooms together, and at really the critical point, a guy came through carrying a box of supplies. He just wanted to take a shortcut. And at that point, it really didn't matter whether I said, no, go around the long way or come through. You know, the game was over. We'd lost it. And we actually couldn't get back to that point where we felt there's something happening here that's saying to us some sort of reconciliation or agreement forward is possible. It really blew a hole in the bottom of it, and we didn't manage to recover that session at that time. So I can't emphasise the importance enough of making sure that we've done our very best to cut down on external distractions. Labelling is tough, isn't it? You know, we all have our biases, that we've mentioned before. Sometimes, you know, when we're in particularly a manager, team leader, supervisor relationship with the person to whom we're talking, or maybe we're one of their reports, we've got our opinions, we've already formed them up, and you know, it's all too easy in the course of a difficult and sometimes delicate conversation to start sticking more labels on. Again, a kind of little metaphor I use here is, you know, you try sticking labels on a jar and pull them off after a few hours and just see how difficult it is to get rid of that residue. You know, once we've put a label on something, even if we've peeled it off in our own minds, it leaves its sticky residue, and there really is a point at which we have to work hard on ourselves to say, I need to stop being a hostage to fortune of my own feelings and emotions here, and as much as I can, avoid labelling. It is tough, it is hard, but necessary. Similarly, we can sometimes feel that we've got the answer to the problems, we've got the solution here, and you know what, I'm just going to tell you. Well, if you think about that, it's not really consistent with the ideas about dialogue, ideas exchange about worth and value of the person with whom we're in the relationship, with whom we're in the conversation. So it is probably best suspended, no matter how tempting it might be on occasions. Right, I'm not using this as an opportunity for a cheap shot at our colleagues in the medical profession, honestly. But I wonder, again, stick with me. Can you recall a point when you'd maybe been talking to your GP and the diagnosis was fired at you before you'd finished what it was you wanted to say? And again, just remember that feeling that you had about, hang on, you haven't heard me out here. There's a lot more going on. Sometimes we are tempted to use cliches, to paraphrase or to sum up what somebody said. And cliches, of course, state that they have their place, but there's a danger of them, a danger in them, in that they can have exactly the same effect as coming up with a diagnosis before you've heard what the patient's really wanting to say. It has the impact of closing people down with almost that kind of, oh, well, they're there. It's not the best way of building rapport and dialogue that's going to be productive and that's going to give us a basis from which to move forward. And when people are talking, when we're talking, we bring all sorts of bits and pieces into the conversation that seem almost peripheral. Again, this is really important when I'm saying to you, please just stay aware of non-verbal shifts and changes, body language shifts and changes. Those are the concerns, and what might seem to be minor worries, they matter, and they're never irrelevant. So, somebody might say to you, this is a couple of times this week that I've not managed to pick the kids up from school, and we might kind of brush over that and think, well, what have it? Somebody else does it surely. We just might want to just check with ourselves and say, well, hang on, what does that mean to that person? How hard is that making their life? Who else is getting involved in this? How's it making them feel at the end of the day? Panicking, rushed. So the skill of listening is really, I think, about bringing together some quite diverse and complex threads and trying to get them into a place where we can begin to see an emerging pattern that allows us then to make greater sense and to reflect to somebody that we have heard what they're saying, and we're beginning to get where it is they're coming from and the meaningfulness of what it is they're saying to us. Sometimes, our very best attempts to maybe help people to feel a little better about themselves have quite the reverse effect. And the two statements here, I think, are reasonably good examples of that. When we're saying to somebody, that's really not worth bothering about, that could actually be a huge affront to them, particularly if this is something that's taken them a hell of a long time to get through the door and to talk to you and to open their hearts about. If you can just think about how diminishing that kind of statement is, and looking at the words on the right hand side of the column, the whole idea about saying, look, that certainly won't happen. What you're worried about, I can promise you that's not going to take place. What I'm trying to say here is, unless you are the person who was going to make that happen, you have no reasonable basis to say it won't. What I think we can do is to sort of explore people's inhibitions, their fears, their hopes. What we're trying to do here is to maybe prepare them for eventualities, and by saying the more prepared you are, the greater impact we can have on lessening fear and trepidation. But what we can't and mustn't do is to say that we can guarantee that something will or won't happen when we haven't actually got control over that process or the event. And that brings us now to the end of this clip. I hope that it's been enjoyable and that you've picked up some ideas about what you might be able to do to revisit some of your approaches to listening and how you can make it a much more productive experience for yourself and also to the person who's in the dialogue with you. Maybe you've had some ideas about your own readiness for it, about your own fatigue, your own diary and other pressing commitments. Are you really going to be able to get yourself into a place where you're thoroughly engaged? Have you cancelled any potential interruptions? Most importantly, though, are you now in a place where you think, actually, I can maybe open myself up at a deeper level to developing a receptive, powerful dialogue with someone that gives us both a chance to move forward in a positive and productive manner? If you'd like to contact us about any aspect of our work, here are our contact details. It would be great to hear from you. In the meantime, good luck with applying some of the ideas that you've heard here. I hope it goes well for you. Thank you and goodbye.